Ashley sat on the floor long after the room had gone quiet, her back pressed against the couch where Rico Suave used to leap up without permission, nails clicking against the fabric like a tiny, defiant drumbeat. The silence was not empty, it was heavy, thick with the echo of everything that used to be there. The soft huff of his breathing, the rhythmic thump of his tail against the hardwood whenever she said his name, the way he would sigh, dramatically, as if he carried the weight of the world in his small, furry body. Now there was nothing. Her phone buzzed somewhere behind her, lighting up with messages she didn't have the strength to read. Words like "I'm sorry" and "thinking of you" waited on the other side of the screen, but they felt too distant, too small to hold what she was feeling. There were no words that could. Grief had a language of its own, and right now, it spoke in silence. "I don't know what to do without you," she whispered, her voice cracking into the stillness. She wasn't sure if she was talking to the empty room or to him. Rico Suave had never liked it when she cried. Even on her worst days, especially on her worst days, he would find her. He always knew. It didn't matter if she hid in the bathroom, or buried herself under blankets, or pretended everything was fine. He would scratch at the door, or push his nose under her arm, or climb onto her chest and stare at her with those impossibly knowing eyes until she laughed through her tears. He had a way of insisting that the world wasn't as heavy as it felt. Ashley closed her eyes and tried to remember the first time she saw him. It came back in fragments, like light through broken glass. A small shelter room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and hope. Rows of barking dogs, each one desperate to be chosen. She had almost turned around, overwhelmed by the noise, by the pleading in every set of eyes. And then there he was. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't the biggest. In fact, he was sitting quietly in the corner of his kennel, watching everything with a calm curiosity that set him apart. When their eyes met, he didn't bark or jump. He tilted his head, as if he had been waiting for her. "Hi," she had said, crouching down. He walked over slowly, deliberately, and pressed his nose against the bars. When she reached out, he licked her fingers once, like a gentle introduction. That was it. No dramatic moment, no grand decision, just a quiet understanding that settled between them. "You're coming home with me," she had said, and for the first time that day, she smiled. Ashley let out a shaky breath, her hands tightening in the fabric of her shirt. "Why does it hurt this much?" she asked the room. But deep down, she already knew the answer. Because he wasn't just a dog. He was there for everything. For the nights she stayed up too late, questioning every decision she had ever made, he would curl up beside her, warm and steady, as if anchoring her to something solid when everything else felt uncertain. For the mornings she didn't want to get out of bed, he would nudge her relentlessly, tail wagging, until she laughed and gave in, because ignoring him was impossible. For the moments no one else saw, the quiet victories, the private heartbreaks, the in-between spaces where life actually happens. He had been her constant. Her witness. Her home. Ashley pushed herself up slowly, her legs stiff, and walked to the corner where his bed still sat. It was rumpled, as if he had just gotten up and would be back any second. One of his toys, a frayed, squeaky thing he refused to let go of even after it stopped squeaking, lay beside it. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. "You loved this stupid thing," she said softly, a small, broken smile tugging at her lips. He used to carry it everywhere. It didn't matter if they were in the living room, the kitchen, or heading out for a walk, he would bring it along, proud and determined, as if it were the most important object in the world. Ashley sank down onto the floor again, clutching the toy to her chest. The last day replayed in her mind, uninvited but relentless. She had known it was coming. That was the cruelest part. There had been signs, the slower steps, the way he slept more, the way his eyes seemed just a little more tired. She had tried to ignore them at first, clinging to the hope that it was nothing, that he would bounce back like he always did. But time doesn't bargain. And neither does love. She remembered sitting beside him, her hand resting on his side, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing. She had memorized that rhythm, as if holding onto it could somehow keep him there. "It's okay," she had whispered, even though it wasn't. He had looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment, it felt like everything they had ever shared passed between them in silence. Every walk, every laugh, every quiet night. And then, Ashley squeezed her eyes shut, the memory too sharp, too final. "I hope you weren't scared," She whispered, her voice breaking. I hope you knew how much I love you. The room stayed silent, but somehow, it didn't feel as empty as before. Because love doesn't leave. It lingers. In the corners of rooms, in the habits you can't break, in the way you still expect to hear the soft padding of paws behind you. Ashley opened her eyes and looked around. She saw him everywhere. In the spot by the window where he used to sit, watching the world go by as if it were his personal show. In the faint scratch marks on the door where he had once demanded to be let in, outraged at being left alone for even a moment. In the invisible paths he had carved through her life, weaving himself into every routine, every memory. I don't know how to do this without you, she said again, but this time, it felt different. Not like a question. More like a truth she would have to learn to live with. She stood up slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the world was still moving. Cars passed by, people walked, talking and laughing, unaware that anything had changed. It felt wrong. How could everything keep going when her world had just stopped? But maybe that was the point. Maybe the world keeps moving so that, eventually, you do too. Not because you forget, but because you carry what you've lost with you. Ashley rested her forehead against the glass, her breath fogging it slightly. Thank you, she whispered. For the love. For the loyalty. For the way he had filled her life in ways she hadn't even realized were empty before him. A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time, it didn't feel as heavy. Grief was still there, it would be there for a long time. But so was something else. Something softer. Warmer. Love, in its most stubborn form. The kind that doesn't end just because someone is gone. Ashley looked down at the toy still in her hand and let out a small, shaky laugh. You're still going to be everywhere, aren't you? She said. And for the first time since the silence had settled in, it didn't feel unbearable. It felt full. Not with his presence, but with everything he had left behind. Memories that would fade at the edges but never disappear. Moments that would catch her off guard, making her smile when she least expected it. A love that had nowhere to go, except to stay. Ashley took a deep breath and stepped back from the window. I'll be okay, she said quietly, as if saying it out loud might make it true. And maybe, one day, it would. Not in the way things were before. But in a new way.